The Baltimore Ravens roster is one of the best, if not the best, in the NFL. And they have to get that down to 53 players because today is a cut down day. And John Harbaugh gave some big roster and injury updates. We talk about that and so much more coming up on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Ravens. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, cut down day has officially arrived. The Ravens must trim their roster to 53 players, and we're going to dive into just how they might do that. Now, John Harbaugh, he gave some big roster and injury updates. We're going to dive into those in the first part of the show. The Ravens roster already looking really good, but these updates helping clarify some guys who have officially made the team according to John Harbaugh, and also maybe some injured players that their status might not be as clear as we might have thought it could have been a couple weeks ago. We'll also dive into the Ravens roster moves beginning. They made a couple of moves on Monday, and then we'll get into my final roster predictions. So I appreciate everybody for being here today, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. And thank you out there to all the everydayers, the first-time listeners. If you're somewhere in the middle, thank you as well. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. Let's dive into it. These updates from John Harbaugh here. Now, I want to start off with just a general opening statement because obviously the Ravens practiced on Monday and gave some updates on injuries we saw in the Ravens game against the Commanders on Saturday. First of all, he said that Xavier Guillory, the wide receiver, he broke his clavicle, so he'll be out for a while, according to John Harbaugh. And he also revealed that Dayton Wade had to have surgery on his chest and ribs area, so he's going to be out for a while. Those are the two injuries that the Ravens have, according to Harbaugh. And he said all the other injuries are things we really expect everybody to be back practicing next week. If they're not practicing right now, we expect them to be practicing next week at this point. He also clarified it did include Mark Andrews, but in terms of Isaiah Likely, this is where things, I guess, get a little bit complicated because Harbaugh ended up talking a little bit about Likely's injury situation. Now, he said that Isaiah Likely's situation is more up in the air. So all the guys, so that includes, Harbaugh gave updates on Jaire Alexander, obviously mentioned Andrews. There have been other players that have not been practicing. Ricard has not been able to practice. Like, these guys are all expected back at practice next week, which is big. And honestly, the updates on Jaire, those were things that were really important because I think people have been starting to get a little bit antsy about Jaire, and he actually made it clear that he's been locked away in the Under Armour performance training room. He said it's a nice place, it's beautiful, but in his mind, it's a prison. So it looks like Jaire really wants to get back out on that field. And Harbaugh said as such. He said he's a veteran guy. He wants to practice, so he'll be going at it when he gets back out there, which I'm excited about. But I think for the Ravens, it's good news. And again, like, they didn't necessarily need to have these guys practicing and pushing themselves through stuff. Like, they are vets. Like Harbaugh said, they don't necessarily need to practice to be ready for week one. So as long as they're out there practicing next week ahead of that Buffalo game, I think that's all that matters here. But the Likely situation is an interesting one. Obviously, he suffered the break in his foot a couple of weeks ago, or coming up on, I think a month or so now, maybe a little less than a month when Isaiah Likely got injured. But that timeline, anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks for that injury, could be a little more, could be a little less, depending on the severity of it. But yeah, this is something you don't want to rush your guy back from. If you're the Ravens, it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help Likely. It doesn't help you if Likely is not back out on the field at 100%, or at least as close to it as he can get. And Kadri Ismail on the Squad Show, we have that live Mondays and Thursdays. It's myself, Hugh, and Sam Njoku. He talked about how, look, this is a contract year for Isaiah. And what's the point for him getting back out there if he's not healthy? He shouldn't want to rush back. I get being out on the field, the production, the stats, but you don't want to make anything worse. So that, to me, is an interesting situation. And With the roster right now, I mean, I don't expect him back for week 1. I know the Ravens, I guess, are hopeful, and people are hopeful he'll be back for week 1. I don't expect that. There is a shot that he potentially ends up on IR, not season ending, obviously, but the Ravens could go into the season with 2 tight ends and maybe just call up a Scotty Washington or something along those lines. I don't necessarily expect that to happen. I feel like likely could potentially be back in week 3, but I also am not a doctor, and I also don't have inside information on how Isaiah Likely's injury is healing and how he's doing. So I don't know. There are a lot of different outcomes for that, but aside from that, really good injury news there from John Harbaugh. Jake Hummel is obviously a linebacker the Ravens signed to be that veteran special teams ace for the team. He's been banged up, and John Harbaugh explicitly said that Jake Hummel is going to make the team. He literally said, Hummel, he's going to make the team. So there was no ifs, ands, or buts, no questions about it. Jake Hummel's going to be on the team. Now, he also said he's going to be a big part of what we're doing. He had that hand thing, so he had to go in there this week and do a little minor procedure. He should be practicing next week or next Wednesday and should be good to go for the week 1 game at Buffalo. If all goes well, which they say it's going great. So I know that there were people, and I kind of talked about the scenario as well here, that it could have been Jake Hummel getting cut for Jay Higgins, potentially, obviously the undrafted inside linebacker out of Iowa who has put his stamp on the Ravens during training camp, offseason workouts, in the preseason. So with Hummel officially making the team, obviously Teddy Buchanan. I've seen people talk about cutting Buchanan. In my opinion, Buchanan is staying. I get that Eric DeCosta he's not been shy to go out there and cut draft picks, even in years like even the rookie seasons. We've seen him move on from guys like Ben Mason. He traded Sean Wade to the Patriots, cut Caillou Blue Kelly. There are a bunch of examples of him cutting rookies when it just doesn't work out. I thought Buchanan showed flashes in that Dallas game. Plus, Buchanan was a 4th-round pick. Those guys that Eric DeCosta cuts, they're 5th-rounders and below. So I think Buchanan is safe. Obviously, Roquan Smith is safe. Trenton Simpson is safe. And now Jake Hummel is safe. So the Ravens would have to keep 5 inside linebackers to have Jay Higgins on the roster. I think that they should do that. In my opinion, Jay Higgins deserves a spot and earned a spot on this team. I know that to me, 5 inside linebackers, it depends on the season. Usually I prefer to keep 4. But if a guy, if it constitutes it, if there's something where the Ravens should keep 5, I'm okay with them keeping 5. This is one of those years that I'm okay with them keeping 5 inside linebackers. If Jay Higgins makes it to waivers, I'm not sure he makes it through. I know there have been a lot of just talks and reports about different teams and essentially them being more worried about their own guys that they cut as opposed to, other teams' cuts. But look, if I'm a team and waiver claims happen, if I'm a team that needs a young guy, I'm going straight to Baltimore. I'm going straight to who they cut. And Brian McFarland actually put together Ravens salary cap. He's come on the show. He does a really great job diving into, everything related to obviously the Ravens salary cap, but just Ravens in general. He ended up putting together a list of players that were claimed on waivers from the Ravens at cutdown day. So this is from 2016 on. 2016, Arthur Brown and Terrence Brooks. 2017, Taquan Mizell and Donald Payne. 2018, Carl Davis. 2019, Tyler Ervin, Matthew Orjak, and Bennett Jackson. 2020, there were none. 2021, Nate McCrary. 2022, none. 2023, Caillou Blue Kelly. In 2024, none. And look, we've seen guys that probably should have been claimed on waivers go and actually just get on the practice squad, no problem. Or Darius Washington, I've said, if you've been listening to me for a long time here, you know that over the past couple of weeks, I have continued to bring back that example of our Darius missing the team. What was it, 2022 or 2023? But I can't remember the exact year, but he did not make the team one year. And he ended up finding his way back to Baltimore. He was not claimed on waivers. So that type of thing, it does happen. We obviously have to talk about guys like Keon Martin and TJ Okoye, CJ Ravenel. Like there are others that could also be in that conversation of guys that could potentially get claimed. If I had to bet, if there was a thing on FanDuel where you could say, oh, well, the Ravens have a player claimed on waivers, yes, no, I would probably say yes to that. I don't know who it's going to be, but at this point, it's interesting. And Harbaugh also had an interesting comment, by the way, about if the Ravens have any position group where they might want to be looking for guys who are available after others cut down their roster. And Harbaugh said, I don't think we're scouring. I know that the scouting department or personnel department is scouring. I know they know everybody, but I would be hard pressed for me to think that we'd bring somebody in here that would be better than who we have, but never say never. And you never know what opportunity may present itself for sure. Eric DeCosta is always looking to improve. Again, we're kind of talking about this roster crunch for the Ravens, and then we're also on top of it being like, oh, who could they bring in? Who could they bring in? They don't really have a lot of spots to do that. You could do one-for-ones, like a big one-for-one I've been talking about is David Ojabo for Jadeveon Clowney. That is obviously one that could happen, but you never know who's going to be cut down on cutdown day. So we'll have to kind of see. We'll revisit that. We're going to go live here today after the Ravens roster is officially released, and I don't know when that's going to be because last year the Ravens released their roster 4 hours late, but whenever it happens, we'll be live here. We'll also have an episode for tomorrow. So we'll be able to kind of break down if there are any other targets for the Ravens, any guys that they could potentially claim on waivers or any vets that could potentially be of interest for them. Coming up in the second part of the show, going to be diving into a little bit about the Ravens' initial first roster moves. And again, just trying to break down this roster piece by piece and seeing if we can identify any other scenarios the Ravens could end up going through. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot coming up on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week one even kicks off, this is your moment. And I am going to crown my champ in August. You look over at FanDuel, the Super Bowl odds, and the Baltimore Ravens are plus 700. They are the favorites over on FanDuel to win the Super Bowl. And I agree with that. You got the Eagles at plus 750, the Bills at plus 750, and the Chiefs at plus 800. I like the Ravens. I think Lamar Jackson is locked in again for this season. The Ravens have been really healthy over the last 2 seasons. If they can stay healthy again, I think that roster is more than capable of winning the Super Bowl this season. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. Continuing on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still diving into Ravens content with you here. As we do on Locked On Ravens, we're a 5-day-a-week Ravens podcast, Monday through Friday. Plus, we have bonus episodes on the weekends. We go live after every single Ravens game, after every single piece of Ravens big news. We now have the Locked On Ravens watch-alongs. We did that in the preseason where we react live to every single play and every single game. And I'm really pumped for the regular season ones to kick off there as well. Of course, we also have the Locked On Ravens squad show. That was live last night. It's myself, Sam Njoku, former Ravens receiver Kadri Ismail, chopping it up twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. But we also are going to have instant reactions after games. So the schedule will kind of move around for that a little bit. Again, appreciate everybody for being here. You can follow me also on social media at KaosShark34, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, the whole 9 yards. But the Ravens, their roster moves officially began on Monday. They made a couple of them, just a few, 3 of them ahead of the deadline. You have MJ, Devonshire, Reed Holsky, and Baylor Cupp all being waived, cornerback, offensive tackle, and tight end, if you didn't know the positions. Again, kind of lower the roster guys. These players that are released before cutdown day generally do not make the practice squad. So I would initially and officially probably rule out all 3 of these guys. But, to me, I think that these were never guys that were in consideration for that anyway. I think the depth is there. And plus, you kind of have to figure that the guys that don't make the roster, there are going to be opportunities for them elsewhere. And the Ravens also will probably try to find a guy or two, maybe just a couple of guys for their practice squad from outside the organization. There's usually 1 or 2 guys, maybe even a couple more than that usually fits that bill. So the roster begins to take a little bit of shape, just a little bit, but we're going to get the majority of those moves here today, obviously, 4 p.m. Be live right after it here on Locked On Ravens, breaking everything down. So be sure you tune in for that. And of course, if you can't catch it live, it's going to be available for you after in both video form and audio form. We got the new look in audio form, actually. Obviously, the thumbnails on YouTube, we've spruced those up over the last couple of months. Well, now in audio form, you got the thumbnails for each episode on there too. So it's not just the logo anymore. It's actually per episode thumbnails, just like we do in video form. So that's really cool. It's a new look for that. And we're still trying to roll out a new look here on Locked On Ravens. But I think the big thing, and we can honestly go back a little bit to John Harbaugh here and what he had to say. A big thing from what I kind of looked at is Harbaugh's just outlook on guys fighting and making the roster and making themselves known. And he said he gets so much joy out of that. He said the whole thing is emotional. It's incredibly meaningful. And, he told a story. He said, quote, walking out of the tunnel back to the buses from Washington after that preseason game, one of the young guys, he was kind of walking slowly by and you could tell he was emotional. And, he said, I asked him, how'd you play? And he goes, I think I did just okay. Not great. And I said, I'll bet you played great. You've been playing great the whole camp. I bet you were physical. And he just gave me the biggest hug. It just means so much. I hope fans and all of us can understand how much these guys put into it. So when you get an opportunity to tell a player he made the team, maybe especially a guy that you didn't expect necessarily to make the team, but I promise you, it was calling his mom and dad every day, every night, and telling him how it went. And they're asking him, what did coach say? And how many plays did you make? And he's telling them, I had a good player, I had a bad player, whatever it is. It's just like your whole world is wrapped up into it as a family, sitting on the buses there in Washington, position right in front of us where all the families, for whatever reason, the families were right there. And, he talked about all the rookie free agent jerseys. He saw 48 for Chandler Martin, 49 for Jay Higgins, 86 for Jamal Banks, 28 for Marquise Robinson. And, he goes into a lot more detail. It's a really long answer. It was a really insightful answer from John Harbaugh. And it kind of puts into perspective the human element of that. And look, I've been very, that is something that I value a lot. I'm very aware of that situation. I know a lot of other people are too. If you're listening or watching, I'm sure you are aware of the human element of this whole thing too. They're not just, these guys aren't numbers. It's not, roster player number 52, roster player number 26. No, these guys are humans, and there's so much that goes into this, so much hard work. And it's really difficult for these guys to go in. And I want to just take a few minutes and talk about this because I think it is meaningful because we can, and we're going to get into the roster predictions and guys, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But, to hear the stories and, you see the videos from not only the Ravens, but a lot of other teams behind the scenes and the cut downs and how much it means to these guys, the emotion that leaves their body. And then you see things on Hard Knocks where you get to see the other side of that with the cuts. And Harbaugh talked about that too. If it gets any easier to tell a guy he won't make the team. And John Harbaugh said, no, it gets harder. It gets harder. He said, I'm heading toward grandpa territory. It was Mike Preston. And he said, just like you, and you see your kids in these kids. And, he had the conversation with Reed Holsky today, and he said that we were talking. He had his Miami shirt on, and that's close to home, and that's a tough conversation. And he said the guys are grateful for the opportunity and for what they felt like they've learned and everything. And, Harbaugh said all I can do is give him a big hug, give him my phone number, and say, hey, let's keep in touch. And again, I give John Harbaugh a lot of credit, and I'm very glad that he went into detail on those answers because it does give that perspective. These guys are going to be fighting for other opportunities. If they don't make the Ravens, the guys who already were cut and won't make the Ravens, they'll be looking for other opportunities. But, as a coach, yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I've never had to tell someone something like that, but, I'm sure for John Harbaugh, it never gets easier, but they're conversations that are necessary to have. And so, for an example of a guy like Keon Martin, who put everything on the line, and a lot of these guys did. I'm not saying that it's just Keon Martin who did it, but he gave insightful answers. We talked about that on yesterday's show of just the fact that it feels like from what he was saying about he's taken every opportunity and he necessarily isn't dwelling on it in a sense, but he seemed like he was at peace and he's like, I did everything I could. I improved my stock. And he feels good about where he is. I feel like whether he makes it or he doesn't, obviously he hopes to make it, right? I mean, that's obvious. But these are guys that, in my opinion, everybody works hard. Everybody works hard. You see it. You see how much it means to them. You see how much the hard work means to the coaching staff. And you can only keep 53. And so even when a guy does enough to make the roster, you don't have a spot and you have to tell him, hey, we can't keep you along for the ride. As a player, you might be sitting there like, man, what else could I have done? But sometimes there's just nothing, and it's just a numbers game. And that's the bad side of the business of football. But it's a side of it. It's a side of it. So I think that for a lot of these players, they have positioned themselves well, a lot of them. And Harbaugh talked about the system they have with, Eric DeCosta being a great leader. He's been doing it for a long time. And, he was asked specifically about DeCosta to bring in the guys of that type of caliber as the undrafted players. And he said that there are guys in contention to make the team that other teams didn't even have on their list at all. And so that shows you how deep that they dig. That's what John Harbaugh said about that. He raved about the system and the foundations and the operations. And that's why, again, this is not just a this year thing. Like, obviously this class is exceptional and one of the best I think they've had, but they had that streak for years and years and years and years of a guy undrafted making the roster. They do so much homework. They go so deep into different schools and different players and traits, and they have that system, like Harbaugh said. And, it's just, it all goes hand in hand with each other. And that's what prepares these guys. That's why the Ravens are in contention every single season. It's because of the fact that, and Harbaugh kind of talked about it at the end of this answer, when he talked about from an agent perspective, he said, quote, if I'm an agent, I want to send them to Baltimore because they're going to get coached. They're going to have a chance. It also makes your camp better. And when your camp's better from top to bottom, you have better practices from top to bottom. So the Lamar Jacksons and those guys, they get better practice too, because they're going against better players who are better prepared, who are coached better, and who know what they're doing. So it makes your whole team better. That is the meticulous effort and the meticulous plan and all the things the Ravens put into this. So when we're talking about the roster and how it's going to look and everything that goes on with it, there's just so many other things that goes on beyond the surface of everything here. And it shows, again, why the Ravens are in the position they are. Obviously, one of the great regular season teams here. They've won 2 Super Bowls in a short amount of time as a franchise compared to other teams who have been in the league for a lot longer and do not have any hardware to show for it. Obviously, the expectation is there. And when you are a good team like that, like John Harbaugh says, and your team gets better and you have that kind of floor most years, that's going to lead to higher expectations. But I think the roster this season is going to be one of the best the Ravens have ever fielded in their franchise history. And with that does come the expectation of a Super Bowl. Coming up in the final part of the show, we're getting into it. My final roster predictions. Stay tuned. A lot coming up here on the show. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. The NFL season is right around the corner, and you can feel the buzz. Fantasy football season is here, and everyone's researching, drafting, and building the championship squads. If you haven't joined the league yet, now's the time, and it's all happening on Yahoo Fantasy. This year, I'm playing fantasy football on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran creating your millionth league. Yahoo Fantasy is loaded with fun ways to compete and brand new features that make the game even better. With season kickoff on September 4th, now's the time to start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football, which offers so many fun ways to compete. Want more ways to play? Try the brand new Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine League mode, where the lowest scoring team is eliminated weekly until one team is left standing. Want to play instantly with friends? Try the new Draft with Friends mode. For the classics, get your crew together and go head-to-head in a private league. No crew, no problem. Join a public league, the easiest way to play. The NFL season kicks off September 4th, so don't wait. Start your league now. Draft now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. It's yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. Moving right along on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on Cutdown Day. Of course, reminder, we will be live after the Ravens roster is officially released, whenever that is. Obviously, the deadline is 4 p.m. Eastern time. But last year, the Ravens released their roster around 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. So we're going to be checking, updating, refreshing, and figuring out when it's going to be released. But whenever that is, we will be live here. And we'll also have it available after in video form and audio form for playback if you cannot catch the live show. And then, of course, we'll have an episode tomorrow morning breaking it down even further. Also, quickly, I want to give a special birthday shout out to Alyssa, who's been with me for a while here. Someone who, from when the show was still really, really small, stuck with me. And so it's her birthday today. I want to give a shout out to her because, look, we've grown a ton here on Locked On Ravens. She's been with me really not since the very beginning, but since the show was, still trying to build up a following. And we certainly are still continuing to try to do that here. So happy birthday to Alyssa. And some goals here on Locked On Ravens for the video side of things. We want to get to 14,000 subscribers by the time the season starts. We are under 50 away from that goal. So tell a friend, tell a family member we're there for them, just like we're here for you on Locked On Ravens. Really appreciate all of the support in an audio form. We're just continuing to grow that each and every single day. I mentioned the new thumbnails in audio form. So thank you. If you're a video watcher or an audio listener, means the world, that all the support that I get on a daily basis. But let's dive into it. I have it right here. It's my final roster predictions for the Ravens. Now, I've kind of gone through versions of this and gone through every scenario I can, and I'll explain my thinking about it, but I feel pretty good about where I'm at. Now, there are a couple of different scenarios I'm going to go through here. Let's just start off and get some of the easier positions out of the way. We're just going to go position by position. Quarterback, it's going to be 2. Lamar Jackson, Cooper Rush. I do not think Devin Leary makes the roster. That's easy enough. Breaking news, Lamar Jackson has made the Ravens roster. I know there was some speculation about whether he could or not. No, I'm kidding. But Lamar and Cooper Rush are my 2 quarterbacks. I do have 4 running backs, and we talked about this on the squad show last night. I'm going to trust the Ravens. Ali is on those special teams units. It's a really good way to make the Ravens, so I'm going to say 4 running backs: Henry, Hill, Mitchell, and Ali. I'm there with it. 3 is my sweet spot. I personally would only keep 3, and if Ali gets claimed on waivers, I'm fine with putting Myles Gaskin out there on the practice squad, but looks like it's going to be 4 for them. At least that's what I can infer from everything John Harbaugh has said. 1 fullback in Patrick Ricard, 6 wide receivers: Zay Flowers, Rashod Bateman, DeAndre Hopkins, Tez Walker, Tyler Wallace, and LeJohntay Wester. I'm going to still go with 3 tight ends: Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, and Charlie Kohler. But I would not be surprised. I'm not saying it's likely that it's going to happen, no pun intended, but I would not be surprised if Isaiah Likely does start the season on injured reserve. The Ravens have 2 designated spots for players that can be designated to return from injured reserve. That's a new rule the NFL put in this season, where you're allowed to designate 2 guys to return on cutdown day. It used to be if you were put on injured reserve at any time before the season, before cutdown day, you were not eligible to play. I'm still going to go with 3. I think that Likely is going to return in week 3. That, again, I have no inside information on that. That's just my prediction. But if that's the case, I probably would just keep him on the roster. You can call up a tight end on the days he's not there, on the weeks he's not there. If it's more of a week 4, week 5 timeline, then yeah, you probably put him on injured reserve. You roll with 2 or maybe 3, and maybe that guy Scotty Washington. I don't know, but I'm just saying, because Emory Jones, this slipped my mind, so I apologize. He actually is on the NFI list, so he doesn't have to be put in one of those injured reserve spots. So you have a second option if you're the Ravens, and maybe that is Likely. I'm not sure. 3 tight ends is that for me, though. I still think Likely makes the roster. 9 offensive linemen: Ronnie Stanley, Andrew Voorhees, Tyler Linderbaum, Daniel Falele, Roger Rosengarten. And then you have Corey Bullock, Carson Vincent, Ben Cleveland, and Joe Noteboom. I feel pretty good about that. I don't think Nick Samak's going to make it. I don't think Garrett Dellinger is going to make it. I'm pretty, not like 100% sure or anything, but I'm pretty confident that they're going to go 9 there. I know Harbaugh talked about the internal battle of, do you keep 9, do you keep 10? But I'm going to go with them keeping 9. Then we move to the defense. I think the defense is really where it starts to get a little bit tight with the roster spots. I'm going to go with 4 defensive linemen instead of 5. I'm taking off John Jenkins. I'm going to go Nnamdi Madubuike, Travis Jones, Roger Washington, and Aeneas Peebles. Now, I think there could be some level of a handshake deal with John Jenkins, depending on what happens here. If you keep Likely on the roster and you cut John Jenkins, then maybe you then put Likely on IR and then you bring Jenkins back. Now, if that was the case, I'd just put Likely on IR in the first place and just keep Jenkins on the roster. But, veterans, it's different. You're not subjected to waivers, so you can agree to go wherever you want. So I'm still going to go with 4 because I think Likely's going to stay on the roster and be back in week 3. That's my prediction. But, I think in that case, John Jenkins does not make this roster. Maybe a handshake deal happens. I'm not sure, but he does provide a valuable skill set. If I have to really, really predict it, in all honesty, I probably expect Jenkins to make the roster, but I'm trying to make room here for guys. I have 5 outside linebackers: Owe, Van Noy, Robinson, Green, and Ajabo. What also going to happen here is it could be flipped here. You could keep Jenkins as your 5th defensive lineman, and then Ajabo gets cut and you keep 4 outside linebackers instead of that. So that's another way that could go. I have 5 inside linebackers: Roquan Smith, Trenton Simpson, Teddy Buchanan, Jake Hummel, and Jay Higgins. I think Higgins did enough. I do. I think the Ravens would be foolish to not keep Jay Higgins on the roster, and they can risk it, putting him through waivers, putting him on the practice squad. But, I think he did deserve it. I mean, there's a chance that Chandler Martin doesn't get past waivers considering how he played. I think Higgins played better, but Chandler Martin had a heck of a preseason too. So I think, to me, I would keep Jay Higgins on the roster. I have 7 corners: Marlon Humphrey, Nate Wiggins, Jaire Alexander, Chidobe Awuzie, TJ Tampa, Jalen Armour Davis, and Keon Martin. I think, again, Martin did enough to make the roster too. He's someone that I'm not sure will make it through waivers. It's possible. Again, I mentioned the Darius Washington situation, but look, he did enough to me. He earned a roster spot. He deserves it. And I think that he should be on the roster. John Harbaugh talked glowingly about him. So we will see how that ends up going. But look, you can never have enough corners. The Ravens and a lot of other teams go through injuries to that position every single season. I think it's very valuable to have a guy like Keon Martin on your roster. Even if he's a game day inactive, he showed that he can make an impact in multiple different ways. I have 4 safeties: Kyle Hamilton, Malaki Stark, Sanusi Kane, and Ruben Lowry. Bo Braid does not make the cut here. He just played. I mean, look, if we just want to go based off playing time, he played very late into that Commanders game. He's obviously been surpassed from Lowry, and there's just not enough room, in my opinion, here to keep him on the roster. So I think he's a practice squad candidate. You have your 3 special teamers: Tyler Loop, Jordan Stout, and Nick Moore. Then I have the 1 player for injured reserve, that is Adisa Isaac. But again, that second guy, you look up and down the roster here, Isaiah Likely could be a potential IR candidate. But obviously those guys will be designated to return, to come back, because that's the new rule the NFL put in. So, man, it is crazy. The Ravens have so much talent. And again, that's a great problem to have if you're Baltimore. A lot of teams don't have that problem. They wish they did have that problem. So I really think that the Ravens are in store for a great year with the roster that they do have. But of course, those decisions, they are tough ones that they have to make here. So again, we'll be live here on Locked On Ravens after the Ravens release their official 53-man roster. We'll dive through who made it, who didn't, who could get claimed, who we want on the practice squad, building that up. A lot of content coming your way today, of course, later for the rest of the week on Locked On Ravens. So that's all I have for you for today's episode. But be sure you put your roster predictions down below here, whether you're in video form or in audio form. And of course, be sure you hit that like and subscribe button on the way out in video form and audio form to catch the live show, or if you can't catch it, watch it after, and then catch up with all of our other Ravens coverage and content. So be sure to stay tuned for all that. I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.